Welcome to an episode of Need to Know Economics, where I cover anything regarding economics, history, technology, and politics. There's an ongoing debate on whether capitalism, socialism, or communism is the superior solution to today's problems. You may see these arguments on the streets and protests, on your Facebook timeline, or in the news. But the real question is America even capitalist? Or are we socialist? And if so, is it a bad or good thing? We're going to take a deep dive into what capitalism and socialism are, and not from an ideological position, but from an objective position, a historical position, and ultimately whether America is capitalist or socialist. Get ready. Please be sure to smash the like button and subscribe, and please check out our sponsor of this video, Public. The answer is, it depends. And most of the time, these definitions are twisted by ideological biases to define anything bad about the opposite political party or ideology. So let's really get into the details. What is capitalism and socialism? First, they can mean many different things, but let's build a standard to work on. Capitalism and socialism are economic structures and theories. We're going to separate that from modern libertarianism and Marxism as more political ideologies, and we'll define the difference between communism and socialism in future videos. These economic theories and structures are built on ownership, and whether production, services, goods, assets should be publicly owned by the government or privately owned. Privately and government owned can also vary by control, whether it's one government dictator with control, one business owner, a pure democracy of millions of people with control, or a large group of shareholders. Capitalists believe ownership should be privatized, and socialists believe that it should be nationalized by the government. These economic styles should not be confused with government structures, such as fascism, anarchism, democracy, etc. In some ways, a country could be a pure democracy version of socialism where the voters dictate control of goods, or it could be a Soviet fascist style where there's one central planner or dictator, or you could have a fascist form of capitalism, or you could have a democratic capitalist economy like the United States. Now that we have the definitions down, let's go into why it depends for the United States. We've been both capitalist and socialist in many different economic ways. We started our country out in 1776, actually without the federal government, but with the Articles of Confederation, and we were very economically capitalist, but the states had strong fascist governments, where they didn't even allow non-landowning white men, women, or black people from voting. Back in these days, your cash in your hands was actually created by Wall Street banks, where they used your savings and deposits to speculate on the American expansion with loans. After this time of speculation, lack of consistency, and no binding structure between the states following the revolution, Alexander Hamilton regrouped the founding fathers, created the federal government, named George Washington as president, created the Treasury Department, and we moved more towards socialism. We had this movement towards socialism for decades, until an ideologue by the name of Andrew Jackson came to be. Jackson was a war leader that helped move the westward expansion and was known for his brutal genocide of the Native Americans. But he was a people's man, in a time where racism was rampant and America really had a strong nationalistic identity. Jackson had a hatred of government banks and central banks and thought the United States government should pay off all of its debt. And he ran on that message. You may hear this rhetoric today, and yes, it was accomplished at one point. Jackson became the first president to pay off all the United States government debt. There was a problem though. See, the debt was really just the government financing coins and dollars into the economy. So when you pay off all the debt, you tax all the money out of the economy, leaving everyone with no government money, like before. This 200-year-old propaganda message and this paying off the debt led Jackson into forcing the United States economy into extreme depression, but it also unleashed the purest form of capitalism. Because we had no government money, dollars, or pennies, banks, people, anyone just started creating their own money and currency to trade goods. Kind of like how cryptocurrencies are booming today, with the same exact message that we need to pay off the debt. There were even coins called hard times tokens, mocking Jackson's horrible economic decisions that people used to actually replace money. This lack of money led Americans west for opportunity in gold, land expansions, and other Wall Street speculations. This pure form of capitalism and this pure ownership of money by banks did lead to the tensions of a civil war, where America eventually introduced the first income tax to fund the first socialist and nationalized federal army. Before, America's military was just made of small state militias, but Lincoln knew it was necessary to build a government military to defeat the treasonous Confederacy. The war was extremely expensive, and it brought tons of government money through all this debt to wash out all this fake Wall Street money and help stabilize the economy for years to come. Following the war, America was flooded with stimulus from all the federal debt spent on the war and the need to rebuild the South, and America was on the road to recovery and innovation. During this time, America developed railroads, steel, electricity, factories, as workers fought against the barons such as J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, and the Carnegies, until really around 1907. Just as always, there wasn't enough government money to meet all the Wall Street speculation into innovation, and the financial markets collapsed. On top of that, America was still running on the gold standard, and the westward expansion of finding new gold and land was all over. So at the time, J.P. Morgan, who would be considered a trillionaire today, bailed out the entire financial markets himself in about 100 years before's 2008 housing crisis. This was considered the Panic of 1907. And following this, a lot of billionaires and trillionaires at the time kind of got sick of bailing out the markets, so the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, about 6 years later. The Fed was the first socialist move towards nationalizing bailouts and regulation of financial markets. America had now nationalized currency, military, and financing of its own government. And following 1907 and the creation of the Federal Reserve, tons of government money floated across the American economy following World War I. America was now in the driver's seat of the world economy while Europe was still destroyed, and under the gold standard, really wasn't allowed to spend and recover itself. America opened back up Wall Street and began financing the entire world, speculating the war reparations with the Weimar Republic under the Treaty of Versailles. We speculated in oil production in the Middle East following the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, and we speculated in the innovation of industries like automobiles, radios, and consumer goods. This speculation of capitalism led to a huge Wall Street debt bubble in the United States. It was prolonged mostly due to the gold standard and led to the Great Depression. The Great Depression was prolonged due to this large ideological view that pushed the speculation into the consumer economy, but never brought the stabilization and government money of socialism into the consumer economy, created a huge distortion. Following the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932, the United States left the gold standard and began the New Deal to socialize the economy again. The nationalization of retirement, known as Social Security, solved the consumer economy for seniors and the high poverty rates amongst the elderly. The federal minimum wage solved the wage gap that consumers face to try to purchase all the goods produced, and the Federal Housing Authority helped solve the mortgage market, created a more stable home ownership across the United States, along with less speculation by banks. The global deflationary pressures of the Great Depression and all the debt created from the Wall Street speculation was just too strong, and there was already too many fascist dictators that arose across the globe, and World War II began. World War II even led to more socialism and nationalization in the United States behind industry's united efforts to help the US fight for freedom and defeat the Axis powers. Minimum wages were increased, yield curve control was implemented, and price controls were even implemented. Following the war, more socialist programs were implemented, such as the GI Bill, helping veterans with home ownership, the interstate highway system was created, and the Cold War led to increased defense spending. This increase in socialism led to the largest middle class built in world history, and led to an extremely large boom in birth rates following the war. As birth rates increased, or a generation little known as the baby boomers increased, along with all the socialist programs built around the consumer economy, America was built for the biggest growth in world history. This led Wall Street back to rampant speculation, and they were right. Large population increases with limited consumer goods was a supply-demand disaster, and Wall Street could solve it. This led to a wide move back into capitalism with the speculation and supply-side economics. And then came Ronald Reagan, who pushed American exceptionalism and really pushed out the speculation production of consumer goods, tourism, telecommunications, real estate, and really pushing for a large elite class in the United States. And this really worked with the largest population boom in world history. Until one sign, Japan in 1989. Japan, after years of extreme growth and innovation, began seeing an aging population. See, their population boom following World War II really didn't have children, and their birth rates fell, and they had an aging demographic. And what happened was a collapse. This system slowly started spreading across the world. It briefly hit the United States in the 2008 housing crisis, as home purchases began slowing as the baby boomers began to get older, and the speculation soon hit Wall Street. It led to huge distortions between housing values and the demand and future affordability of these homes. The entire real estate market, collateral market, and financial system collapsed under this capital speculation in booming populations and booming home ownership. In order to save the system, America socialized the entire financial markets by buying all the troubled real estate assets that were speculated on, stimulating the economy, and bailing out the banks, but almost completely nationalizing the lending market through quantitative easing. To stabilize the housing market, the federal government, much like Japan, began quantitative easing, where the government bought treasury bonds to force yields and interest rates down, hoping that most consumers would be more likely to take out a loan or a mortgage, and banks would be more likely to lend. Now, this helped create more credit expansion, and as banks created more loans, the government would then buy those mortgage-backed securities back from the banks, taking the risk out of the private markets, basically socializing credit creation. America had went from almost being completely capitalist to socializing money, the military, the financing of the government, elderly's retirement, workers' wages, the consumer economy, and the housing market, and even almost credit creation in a way. But before you think we're all socialists, we also allowed capitalism to develop, innovate, speculate, and allocate capital in railroads, telephones, the internet, technology, cars, and many of the industries socialism just really does not do. America is both, and typically allows its citizens and democratic republic to dictate which route the country needs to go. This is much different than fascist governments where Hitler, Stalin, and Mao dictate what goes on and what's centrally planned across the economy. America really dictates whether government should be involved at the time or government should take a step back. It's really mix and matched. So where is America going? Well, if you ask me, my opinion, we're heading more towards socialism. For many reasons I could cover in future videos, and no, it's not your Stalin or Mao type of socialism. My two biggest reasons are debt and demographics. We're heading to a world of aging populations and an aging generation that has speculated and created more debt in world history, and they're living way beyond their means and have really treated future generations very poorly to get there. Not only on top of this huge speculation and debt, but at the sake of reducing future Americans' productivity by reducing wages, outsourcing jobs, and creating unproductive debt structures like college and healthcare. This has led to huge wealth disparities, not really even between classes, but between generations. The wealth disparity is an issue, but the real issue is the debt-to-income disparity between millennials and baby boomers. If baby boomers want to stay rich and sell their houses and assets and goods to the consumer populations, they have to create a ton of inflation across millennial wages, either increase our productivity significantly by a ton, or create some type of debt jubilee of all of our unproductive debt, or they're going to be forced to crash the housing market and stock market so we could buy from them at lower prices, or there's just not going to be any buyers. Now, whether this solution is solved by some central bank digital currency by the government erasing all debts and increasing lending across millennials, or we nationalize secondary education, or we completely wipe all the debts of all the millennials, I'm not sure what the solution is, but I'm curious on what you guys think the solution may be. And do you think America is socialist or capitalist, or both? And most importantly, where do you think we're going? Not just from an ideological sense, but specific policies. And please comment below what you guys think. Please be sure to smash the like button and subscribe. We also created a Patreon to support us in making this type of content. Just search needtoknoweconomics.com/Patreon to join. Thank you.